Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our lecture series on World War I, more specifically talking about the effects of the war on the home front. Uh, so one of the things you have to understand is we're fighting a war of attrition, which essentially means, the first side to run out of stuff, whether that's soldiers or bullets or food, is going to lose. That means it's a total war. Uh, Everything becomes important. Food production becomes important, so farming is important. The the amount of resources that a country has becomes important. So scrapping and recycling become important. The factories systems become important, and the workers in the factories, because we have to turn that raw material into a finished product. And so every aspect of society is kind of driven towards winning this war. And that holds true in the United States. And so to be able to coordinate that real massive effort, the government is going to start to seize control over areas of the country that typically it hadn't before. Remember, we were not that long ago laissez-faire capitalists, which means business kind of could do whatever it wanted and the government didn't regulate it. But now that we're in wartime, we're going to see the government taking control in some pretty extreme ways by limiting workers' abilities to strike, because if they're striking, they're not making bullets. We're going to see the setting of the government coming in and setting production goals and telling businesses this is how much you have to make, and setting prices. These are ideas that capitalism generally rejects. It believes that the market should set these things, and so you're going to see also to get people to buy into this, to the war effort, into government policies about economic control. You're going to see propaganda campaigns started, like the Committee on Public Information, that's created essentially as a propaganda wing to try to convince America that the war effort is justified and that the sacrifices that are needed to supply our troops are justified as well. And so they're going to spin this war effort into to a moral crusade, that it's the good guys versus bad guys. So it'll play up the very real idea of defending democracy. Right? We were essentially getting involved in this war for two reasons. One, we are trying to defend democracy. Germany's not a democracy. Great Britain and France are. And so, they'll play that up, and they'll downplay the second reason, which is an economic reason, that, we do a lot of trade with Great Britain, and if they fall, we'll lose that trade and the money that they owe us. And so they'll cast this war as good guys versus bad guys, which most historians would tell you that's not a fair assessment. World War II, clearly good guys and bad guys. World War I, it's a little bit more ambiguous. But the Committee on Public Information doesn't really care about that. They just care about getting all of the Americans on the same page to support the war effort so we can fight it and get this war over as soon as possible. We'll see the formations of loyalty leagues across the country. So, small towns will create committees that are designed to promote the war effort. This is, some of the stuff that's going to happen is going to be crazy. People are going to, they're going to stop teaching German in high schools because Germany's the enemy, which is, ridiculous. They're going to change the name of sauerkraut. German-speaking people are going to change their names because they don't want to be associated with Germany, which that's really scary. And so everything everything German will end up being condemned. And this is one of the, this is the thing that happens in war, is a lot of times what we do is we dehumanize our enemy. And that's, that is one of the things that is kind of necessary for soldiers. If they're going to shoot and kill people, what makes it easier to do that is dehumanizing them. And so, that might be effective for a soldier to help win a war, but, it's not good for society when society dehumanizes people based on their race or ethnicity. I mean, it goes back to the implications of social Darwinism and racial groupings in general. But the Committee on Public Information is definitely going to be promoting these things. German is bad, and instead of sauerkraut, it's going to be sour cabbage or whatever. Yeah. Right. So we're also going to see government controlling not just propaganda, but controlling the actual economy through the War Industry Board. The reality is, we're going to have to turn domestic production into military production. And so, soda factories have machines that fill bottles of soda, bottles with soda. Well, we're going to convert that from, because the machinery is similar to filling shells with explosives, we're going to convert those soda factories to uh, you know, factories that fill shells with explosives. Well, businesses can't really do that on their own. They might need some specialized equipment. They're going to need training for that, and that's when the government is going to come in and try and set that kind of stuff up. And so the government through the War Industry Board is going to start to control production, what people make. Right? They want to make sure that we don't have outrageous inflation because demand is getting messed up. They don't want to make sure that workers don't quit their job because if they quit their job or go on strike because they don't like the wages, that will limit the amount of guns and bullets we can make. And so to be able to make sure we don't have any of those things that might impede our ability to fight the war, the War Industry Board is going to set prices, wages, and production. I mean, this is the antithesis of capitalism, right? In capitalism, you get to decide what you make. Well, with the War Industry Board, they'll come in and tell you you're not going to make, you're not going to make tarps anymore. You're going to make tents. You're not going to make soda anymore. You're going to fill explosive shells for whatever whatever it is. They're going to take away that freedom, and they're doing that so we can help win. For a greater cost to help win this war. They're going to tell businesses you have to pay your workers this much. They're going to tell the workers you can't go on strike during this time. They're going to set prices and say, your business has to charge this X amount of dollars. And during the war, it's going to be effective, and so we're going to see, we're going to be able to increase our production during the war by about 20%, and the idea is, too, with the workers, that the War Production or War Industry Board is essentially going to tell workers either work or fight. And so, if you want to go on strike, we'll just draft you in the military and send you over to fight. So it's going to keep workers working. And most Americans are willing to accept this because they understand that it's a short-term thing, that when the war is over, the economy will convert back to a peacetime economy. And it will for the most part. Guys like FDR are going to be paying attention to, history and what happened in the control that the government had over the economy during World War I, and they're going to try and emulate that during the Great Depression. And so most of these things will go away. Some of them will ultimately hang around. Committee on Public Information, we've seen this already. We talked about it for a second. Uses the war as a moral crusade, forms the loyalty leagues, condemns anything German, including language schools. Sorry for the repeat in the slides. I didn't recognize that was. But there's not going to be, not everybody in America is going to be on board with these things, and for different reasons. Most people accept the War Industry Board. Most people accept the Committee on Public Information, but there are going to be critics about the war in general. Not everybody is on the same page with going to war, although most people are. We're going to see the government, in an effort to tamper that criticism, are going to pass the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which essentially outlaw criticism of wartime leaders and policies. Let's be blunt here. This is very undemocratic. I mean, the whole purpose of democracy is to have the freedom to criticize the government and society. I mean, that's what the purpose of democracy is, right? It's, having the freedom to discuss things truthfully, which means criticism in a lot of ways, and, let the people decide. Well, the Espionage and Sedition Acts are going to outlaw that criticism, and they're going to use the war as justification for that we can't have criticism because it's going to be a distraction from fighting the war. And so it's going to try to eliminate criticism of war at the home. Now, there's still going to be outspoken critics. Right. And so the government is going to just shut it down. The postmaster general is going to have the authority to ban printed materials, anti-war materials from being sent through the mail. And this will be challenged through court in Schenck versus the United States. And the Supreme Court actually will come down and say freedom of speech can be curtailed during wartime. Now, this will be re-adjudicated throughout the rest of our history. And so, in this particular court case, the government's going to have some pretty broad ability to censor speech during wartime. That will be dialed back later on, however, where the government, to be able to curtail your free speech, will have to prove that speech is in fact inhibiting national security, and so, which is a very difficult thing to do. But during World War One, they're pretty much able to arrest you for any kind of public criticism of the war. And so, one of the most outspoken critics is going to be Eugene V. Debs. Eugene V. Debs is a pro-labor socialist in the United States. He doesn't believe in capitalism and equality of opportunity. He believes in equality of outcome, that the government should come in and set prices and set wages and, promote that equality of outcome mentality. He believes that this war is a capitalist war to make big businesses richer. And businesses are benefiting from the war, so there's some truth in that, although later this will be investigated and there won't be any evidence that big business pushed America into war. Clearly when you're making more supplies to, fight the war, businesses will make money, but it's, a stretch to say that they started the war for this. And it's not just businessmen that benefit. It's, African Americans benefited with the Great Migration, and women benefited by entering the workplace and getting more freedoms at the same time. So, how real are Eugene V. Debs' criticisms? I don't know. I tend to be skeptical, but the argument that we shouldn't fight wars because wars are immoral. I mean, I think there's an argument there. And what I will tell you for certain is that in America, the freedom to express ideas should always be the most protected of all of our rights. And I know throughout times in history, and we've talked about them, and I know this is an ongoing issue where sometimes thoughts and ideas are suppressed for whatever reason, and I would argue that is extremely un-American, anti-democratic, and and ultimately extremely intolerant to not allow people to express their political opinions. So Eugene V. Debs will be speaking out against the war, speaking publicly. He'll be telling people that this is a capitalist war and that it's your duty not to support it, and that you should be standing up for domestic issues like the rights of workers over what's going on in Europe. And because of that, he will be arrested along with thousands of others. And so, people will literally be going to jail for not supporting the war. This right here is Eugene V. Debs. And so just to kind of quote him here, he says, "I'm opposed to every war but one," right? So does not support wars. Wouldn't maybe call him a pacifist, but anti-war for sure. I'm opposed to every war but one. I am for that war, heart and soul, and that is the worldwide revolution. He's talking about the socialist revolution, right? The worker over the owner. And I would 1,000 times rather be a free soul in jail than a sycophant and coward in the streets. So he's essentially saying that he doesn't believe that he should give up his political ideology and his philosophy, you know, to the will of the government, which is, a really, honestly, a very democratic idea. And he's willing to go to jail to, to be able to essentially protest this kind of censorship. And it is censorship. I mean, anytime you tell somebody that they can't think a certain thing, or, it's a censorship to say that somebody can't vocalize an idea. I mean, those are clearly protected by the First Amendment. So he will actually, while he's in prison, run for president in 1920, and he'll get 1 million votes from jail. So I mean, that goes to show you that there are people out there that are, willing to support critics of the war, and may in fact be critics themselves. So we're not all on the same page, and that's the beautiful thing about the United States, is that we're never always on the same page, and our Constitution is written in such a way as to protect you from having ideas that are outside of the mainstay. Now, unfortunately, because of the Supreme Court decision Schneck versus the United States, that right had been curtailed during World War I on the justification that it's, in the best interest of security. That will be changed later. And so there are still limits to your free speech and your ability to speak out against the government. They're very, very, the government is, or I should say, your rights to speak out about the government are some of the most protected rights that you have. But they can be limited and curtailed today. But they actually have to prove, the government has to prove that that your speech is actually, a threat to national security. And just saying we shouldn't be in this war, that this war's got dubious beginnings, that is protected speech today. It's not just Eugene V. Debs and socialists that are opposed to the war. Oh, we're also going to see Jeanette Rankin, who's going to be the first woman elected to the House of Representatives. There had been other women that had served in the House of Representatives, but generally they were appointed to fill out their husband's term. So she's actually elected to office. She is going to vote against entry into the war, very specifically because she believes we just have domestic issues that we need to take care of that take priority over the war. She wanted to focus on those progressive reforms, healthcare, women's right to vote, and those things. And so he will, be the only person to vote against the war in the House of Representatives. And then probably the most famous of the anti-war, I shouldn't call them protesters, but advocates, is going to be William Jennings Bryan. We had talked about him before. He's the famous populist that, one of the founders of what will later become the progressive movement. He was Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State, and eventually quit because he saw that loans to the Allied nations were dragging us into war. And so he is a pacifist, and he will resign from office because he just sees the impending war with Germany, and he doesn't support it. Now, William Jennings Bryan will ultimately kind of back off of that stance once war is declared. And so he eventually comes to support Wilson because he recognizes that if we unify together, that the war will end sooner, and that will ultimately save lives. And so he will essentially say, well, I disagree with the idea of war, We must all now unite in working to end the war quickly. And so he's essentially, yes, he is a pacifist and against war, but he's also a pragmatist, which essentially means a realist. He keeps it real. And he says, look, war is inevitable. It's already started. I can't stop it now. So I'm going to support it in the effort to make it end quicker and save lives that way. And so will ring true to quite a few pacifists around the world, and really similar to William Lloyd Garrison during the Civil War, where William Lloyd Garrison was a pacifist, but ultimately ended up supporting Lincoln in the war because he thought that the outcome of the war, could possibly be worth it. Okay, so the conclusion is America now has pulled away from isolationism. We are totally involved in European affairs. This is essentially the end of the Monroe Doctrine. The government is going to exert more control over our everyday lives and the economy. A lot of that power will be released from the federal government at the end of the war, but they will retain more control than ever before. And from this point forward, we're just going to see continual increases in governmental power over the economy and our everyday lives. We'll see all citizens are impacted in some way. We've talked about that. Women with increased duties at home and in the workforce. African Americans are changing where they live geographically, the type of jobs that they're having. And then we're seeing that the North isn't this post-racial society that kind of it got portrayed as before the Great Migration. African Americans are going to be able to accumulate wealth in ways that they had been out of reach before. Old people too old to fight, are going to be asked to go back into the workforce. People living at home, old people, women, small children will be asked to grow victory gardens and ration food, ration electricity, and things. And so essentially, all aspects of society and all people are going to be affected by this war in one way or another. And the war brings more economic opportunities to different groups, mostly women and African Americans. And so there will be some anti-war supporters. There's not going to be, America is not ever completely unified behind any idea. And so anti-war supporters are viewed as un-Americans. A lot of them are going to be locked up. Anything German is persona non grata and will be demonized. Demonized. I think I just made up a word, demonized. So there you go. That concludes our lecture for today. We will pick up tomorrow with the end of World War I and the probably one of the worst treaties in history, the Treaty of Versailles. Thank you very much for your time. I will see you again shortly.